Weirdness and the world of gaming go hand in hand, but you just have to wonder what was going through some people's heads when they decided to greenlight and license games. I'm pretty sure the Lord of the Rings Gollum belongs on this list, but since that's pretty low-hanging fruit, here's 10 of the weirdest licensed games ever. Let's get things rolling with a real humdinger of a game that came out for the Sega Genesis and Super NES all the way back in 1994. Shaq Fu stars none other than basketball legend Shaquille O'Neal as he finds himself in another dimension battling otherworldly warriors in 1v1 combat. The 90s had some pretty wild stuff with more than a few really off-the-wall games, but Shaq Fu is without a doubt one of the weirdest to ever make it to market. And I don't know if any of you ever saw the movie Kazam that came out in 1996, but it features Shaq in the leading role, and while it's not really his fault, Kazam is easily one of the worst films ever made. And while it may have received some mixed reviews at the time, in retrospect, many gamers and gaming publications regard Shaq Fu as not just one of the weirdest games ever, but also one of the worst. Let's just say everything from the overall plot to the gameplay leaves a lot to be desired. I'm not sure I agree it's as bad as people say, but I am certain it isn't good. Oh, and fun fact, a sequel entitled Shaq Fu: A Legend Reborn was released in 2018, but it's received mostly negative reviews. Will we ever get a good movie or game starring Shaquille? I wouldn't bet on it. Next up on our list is Sneak King from 2006. The reason this particular game is so weird is because it stars Burger King's mascot, the King. The goal here is to stealthily sneak around and deliver 4 different types of Burger King meals to some very hungry people. The game also features 4 different levels, namely the Sawmill, the Cul-de-sac, Construction Zone, and Downtown. There are also 2 different game modes, these being Free Play and Challenge Mode. Believe it or not, Sneak King is just one of 3 promotional Burger King themed games that were released back in 2006. The other 2 are Pocket Bike Racer and Big Bumpin', with the latter being the most well received of the 3 games. As for Sneak King, well, the game is very mid at best and downright terrible at worst. In spite of this, the game still managed to sell over 2 million copies, so good job I guess. So everybody loves Shrek, right? I can just hear Smash Mouth's All-Star playing in my head right now. But what happens when you use the Shrek license and apply it in a pretty obscure way? Simple, you get 2007 Shrek 'n' Roll. The game features Shrek, Fiona, Puss in Boots, and Donkey, as well as 20 other characters from the Shrek franchise. Shrek 'n' Roll has one character standing on one side of a long wooden plank and another character on the opposite end. The idea is to ascend a tower and collect coins while avoiding hazards by tipping the plank and rolling the ball left and right. If you've never heard of Shrek 'n' Roll, good, because the game is pretty trash, and if you play as Shrek himself, he constantly says, "I prefer swamp rats, but coins will do." It would drive me totally nuts. Anyway, this one is a super weird licensed game as well as a really bad one. The DC universe is known for its cast of powerful superheroes and deranged supervillains, but Batman has to be one of the most iconic and memorable caped crusaders of all time. Enter 2012's Gotham City Impostors, where you don't get to play as Batman or the Joker or anyone from the DC universe for that matter. Say what? Yep, you heard right. Gotham City Impostors is a first-person shooter multiplayer game where 2 teams of 6 go up against one another in 4 different game modes. One side consists of Batman wannabes, while the other is nothing but rip-off Jokers. There isn't much about Gotham City Impostors that isn't weird, but it is actually a pretty entertaining game that was, up until recently, free to play and available on the Steam store. Looking at reviews, it actually has a score of 85% on Steam, and it looks like a lot of fans really want Gotham City Impostors to make a return. Well, Steam, what are you waiting for? Give the people what they want. Michael Jackson is still hailed as the king of pop and is easily one of the most talented artists and singers the world has ever seen. But did you know there were several games based on his 1988 film Moonwalker? As it turns out, Sega created 2 beat-em-ups that came out in 1990, one that was released for arcades and another that came out for the Sega Genesis and Master System consoles. Anyway, the arcade version makes use of an isometric perspective and has Michael fighting off bad guys using magical powers rather than physical melee combat, which is actually very on brand for him and his wish for the world to be a more peaceful place. Admittedly, Michael Jackson's Moonwalker is a very weird game since it sees him saving kids from Joe Pesci and receiving some navigational assistance from his pet chimpanzee Bubbles. But really, Moonwalker is an amazing piece of video game goodness that fans of his work should absolutely have the opportunity to experience. Even if you can just watch some stuff on YouTube, I really recommend it. You would probably expect the next entry in this list to be downright terrifying since it's based on the Ring series of novels by Suzuki Koji, which in turn inspired the 1998 film Ring and the 2002 American remake entitled The Ring. But as it turns out, 2000's The Ring Terror's Realm has virtually nothing to do with the novels or movies. What happens is that you get sent to an alternate dimension to find out why a computer program known as Ring is causing CDC employees to meet their untimely end. You'll find yourself fighting against apes that have had their skin peeled off, off and solving some puzzles, but for the most part, the entire experience is boring as hell. More than being plain weird, The Ring Terror's Realm is just supremely dull and makes little to no sense. Don't even bother trying to play this one unless you want to permanently fall into a coma. Now, for those of you who are fans of classic rock, there's just no way you aren't familiar with Kiss. But I'd wager that many of you have never heard of Kiss Psycho Circus The Nightmare Child that came out for PC in July 2000. Man, I actually almost forgot this game existed, but remember seeing gameplay of it back when I was a teenager. And I also remember thinking how incredibly weird and creepy it was. Interestingly, this game is based on Todd McFarlane's Kiss Psycho Circus series of comics. The Nightmare Child is a first-person shooter that follows a Kiss tribute band that suddenly receives superhuman abilities. Looking at gameplay, it feels like a slower version of Quake 3 Arena, and now it just looks a lot weirder than scary. I'm not sure what my adolescent mind did, but I genuinely remember this being a lot more frightening when I first saw it. Anyway, The Nightmare Child received lukewarm reviews at the time, but a lot of people call it an underrated gem, so maybe it's still worth checking out after all. This might be the oldest game on this list, but 1989's Friday the 13th is considered one of the weirdest video games of all time and may even be able to give Shaq Fu a run for its money in the worst games ever department. I do think, like Shaq Fu, Friday the 13th has received an unjustifiably negative reputation, but like Shaq Fu, Friday the 13th is, at best, a mediocre game where you can have some fun. So in essence, you alternate between 6 counselors who are at Camp Crystal Lake. Your job is to collect items, take out some minor enemies, and do your best to defeat Jason whenever he rears his ugly masked head. But what makes Friday the 13th so odd is its ugly graphics, bright color palette, and complete lack of gore. In many ways, it's a family-friendly version of the Friday the 13th story. Huh? Honestly though, there are so many different opinions surrounding this game, so if you want to go down the rabbit hole, be aware that it just keeps on going and going. You've been warned. In 2002, a game called Darkened Skye was released for PC and the Nintendo GameCube. Players take on the role of Skye as she embarks on an epic quest to find her lost mother. Now, if you take one look at Darkened Skye, you'll think it's just another third-person action-adventure game. But because Simon & Schuster, the game's publishers, managed to obtain funding from Mars Incorporated, Skittles, the colorful candies that come in a range of flavors, play a major role in Darkened Skye. Yes, Skye is only able to cast certain spells if she has the right combination of colored Skittles, and it's her job to reassemble the Great Rainbow that has been destroyed by the evil Lord Necroth. Obviously, the Great Rainbow is a tip of the hat to Skittles' tagline, "Taste the Rainbow," which is pretty freaking weird. Darkened Skye isn't a bad game, but it's not a particularly good one either. There's no denying that the Skittles element is ultra weird though. And last but certainly not least is perhaps the single weirdest licensed game ever, and that's 1999's Pepsiman. Seriously, how is this game even a thing? Reviews for Pepsiman range from 2 out of 10 to 90 out of 100. It's abundantly clear people have no idea what to make of it, but whether you love it or hate it, Pepsiman is made up of 4 levels, each of which is divided into smaller segments. You play Pepsiman himself and have to run, dash, jump, and super jump to avoid obstacles and help save people who are heavily dehydrated by providing them with a can of Pepsi. The gameplay is incredibly simple and linear, and most of the time you're being chased by something like a giant rolling Pepsi can and doing your best to avoid incoming cars, cranes, and people. The final level takes place in Pepsi City, while the first 3 are set in San Francisco, New York, and Texas respectively. Yes, really. The whole premise behind Pepsiman is so weird and singularly outrageous that I don't think another licensed game could ever come anywhere near it. In my opinion, Pepsiman is the weirdest licensed game ever created. And so here ends our rundown of 10 of the weirdest licensed games ever. Which one of the games we just mentioned do you think is the weirdest? Or do you have an even weirder one we failed to mention? Let us know in the comments. Make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for daily gaming, VR, and tech content. From me and the crew, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Later!